Great. First, thanks to Pixelogic for having me. They flew me in from London to the great sunny weather in Los Angeles, which is nice. I'm enjoying that. And I'm here to talk to you guys about dynamic figure sculpture. And I want to show you guys as well some new stuff I've been working on. And hopefully it'll be a treat for all of you. I know I'm excited to show it. Before we get into dynamic figure sculpture, which I hope to do a little bit of demo for you, actually do some sculpting up here, I want to show you, I was reflecting when I was putting my presentation together about ZBrush, and I've been using it for a long time. I mean, Paul just said 99 was the debut at SIGGRAPH, and I think I bought my first copy in 2002. And so it's been a good 13 years, and I've seen the software progress amazingly, and it is like the default kind of de facto creative tool for me. And looking back, I'm pretty much scanning my hard drive for things I made with ZBrush, and I have like 10 years worth of stuff. So I'm just going to quickly flip through some slides and show you some of those, and then get into new stuff. But we have to kind of look back before we look forward. Okay, so I'm not going to say too much about any of these projects, but I've been sculpting in ZBrush for a long time. And you know, a lot of it started as just digital stuff, but over the years, things have gotten, you know, both fabrication methods, 3D printing, and even bigger things like Lady Gaga down here, which is like 13 feet tall. You can make things physically now, which you all know, but I've seen the progression, and it's amazing, and it's a really exciting time to be using and creating things digitally because there's so much power in it. So it's my favorite, pretty much my only sculpting tool digitally. Okay, so again, just a selection of things from the past. You'll see kind of a thread, hopefully, running through my work, and it's kind of an interest in the figure, and that's what people know me for. And within this interest in the human figure, it's, you know, when I break it down into the fundamentals, it's all about, you know, the mechanics of it, how I represent things digitally or drawing. It's about understanding, you know, what's underneath the skin and kind of the language of the body, which is anatomy. And I've watched a few of the presentations over the last couple days, and that's the word that pops up all the time when people are talking about making characters, right? And it is the fundamental thing when you're making a character. You can't fake it, you know, like it's the language of the body. And so it's something that I studied early on, and I've taught it for more than 10 years now. And to me, it's like the glue. It's like the most important tool to realizing a figure in whatever medium you work, but especially digitally. So just a couple more. A lot of the anatomy study that I did has subsequently kind of transitioned into animal anatomy. I've somehow gotten a reputation for making horses, and I've been asked to make lots of horses. Most recently, I collaborated with an artist to make 4 large, life-size Shire horses, concrete. They're sitting on the south bank of the Thames River in London, just outside of MI6 headquarters. For anybody who is a James Bond fan, you just go by MI6, past all the security cameras, take a right, and they're on the beach right there. During the day, well, depending what time you hit them, at high tide, they're nearly submerged. So you have to plan it right if you're in London, and they're hopefully going to stay there, but they might move around. Some work on Warhorse, again, like transitioning human anatomy into animal anatomy. There's videos on my website showing some of this stuff, so I'm not going to go too deeply into this because this is not the point of the presentation, but relevant, I will admit, is relevant. And again, some classically inspired Greek stuff, sculptures, cyclopses for various films, giants for various films. And I've started to get into a little bit of kind of product design as well. So at the top, you can see this range of iPad docking stations that I make. Again, it's kind of exploring this boundary of designing digitally and producing and fabricating and then actually going into production. So many, many, many copies, not just to print, but mastering and then, you know, getting manufacturing sourced. So that's not all, I guess. I mean, I pretty much had to stop after 5 pages of stuff. Some of the stuff is not seen. Some of these on the right here are demos that I do when I do my workshops. This top one, top right, is, I guess that's a Space Marine. I visited Games Workshop for people who know, like, that whole set of kind of characters. The challenge when I was doing the anatomy course for them was to, if you know the proportions of a Space Marine, they're like these ridiculously squat little characters. They're like, there's no way you could fit a body inside the Space Marine armor. And so over a few days during breaks or just leading up to breaks, I would just sculpt the stuff we were talking about into this Space Marine, and that's what he turned out. This bottom one was just a little figure study that I was doing at DICE when I was there doing some anatomy workshops for them. No real human portrait on it, but we just kind of freestyled. And then, you know, some of these kind of take us more closely to like the very exacting science of anatomy. And my point of showing all this is not to make you think that in talking about anatomy is not all about realism. It's about having the tool to give you the ability to stylize realistically, you know, and in the end, like, it's something that you can bend when you know it properly, but if you just totally make it up, then you won't necessarily have a coherence to your designs. So that's why I teach anatomy, is kind of the mechanics and an understanding of how the mechanisms fit together. So that is kind of the recap of kind of my stuff that I've done over years and years in ZBrush. And what I'm working on now is not a sculpture project, but it's a library that's actually been going on for about 5 years, and it's called my Bodies in Motion project. And the URL is here, and you guys can, I'll show you guys a bit about this project, but originally I started shooting figures for my anatomy courses, because when I was putting them together, there was like no resources online. You can do Google image searches, and you get a good image here or there, but when you're looking for something specific, it's very hard to find good examples. And then if you find a good example, you might want more information about it, meaning other views of it or other images in a sequence, right? So that you can understand what the body's doing rather than just getting a snapshot of the figure at any one time. So I've been shooting a lot of sequence footage, like people might remember or might know of Edward Muybridge, like pioneering photographer from late 19th century, like legendary. He shot sequences of horses galloping, most famously, but also he put together this corpus of work called animal locomotion, which was humans and other animals just doing things, walking, climbing, fighting, wrestling. And there's so much information in those plates. And when I was studying anatomy, when I was drawing and really trying to learn, I would look at these little thumbnails, and I was like begging for a high-res version of that, because I could tell that there was good stuff, but even the originals, if you see the original plates in a museum or wherever, I mean, they're not stellar, you know, like they lack the fidelity. I mean, this is late 19th century, right? 1880, 1890. He was doing the best he could, and he was amazing, but we want resolution, right, to get and study details. So I've been shooting a lot and getting some amazing talent, right? And so for me, like, photography is like rendering, lighting and rendering a model, right? And it's exactly the same thing, except rendering is instantaneous in the real world, right? You set up your lights, and you flash, and you strobe, and you put your camera sync on, and you get amazing real-time global illumination. I mean, Keyshot is fast, but not as fast as the real world, not as fast as photons. And so we are literally, I'm trying to capture a sequence, like sequences of amazing people doing amazing things, because anatomically, what I want to know is I want the information of how the body deforms, you know, how things move when you're not talking about somebody in like a little pose with arms down by the side, standing with their weight evenly distributed on both feet, like we see all the time, right? Because you have to set it to rigging that way, but that's not how the body works. right? So there's this information gap between what's available for us now as reference and what I would like to study, right? What I want to learn from. So I'm putting this together, and I'm shooting a lot of photographs, getting guys like this, right? You know, reasonably fit looking, but when he does his thing, it's exceptional. And you start to see things when you see a dynamic figure that you don't see in real life. Like, okay, he looks like a little muscly guy, not bodybuilder type, but pretty good. But when he does his thing, exceptional, right? Does his thing with good lighting, even better, right? You can start to see ridiculous things happening on the body. Like this, we could spend 3 hours talking about what's going on right there. And if you're doing like super advanced, sophisticated characters, rigs, things like that, you really need to know this. You need to know, you know, if we're talking about Hulk in Avengers 3 or whatever, wherever the next time he shows up is, that's the kind of fidelity people are aiming for, but you have to know about it first, right? And that's like the magic, that's the mystery. That's why we have like a continuing process of study in front of us, okay? But great to have concrete information to learn from. So, like I said, rendering, like photography for me, is about lighting. This is not lighting. This is the opposite of lighting. This is flat. It's not looking great, but put some light on and you see amazing stuff happen. Okay, so that's the goal of the project, is to put a bunch of stuff out there, but curated by me. Like, I make sure it looks great, well, because I'm shooting it, but also, if it's not great, I'm not going to put it on the site. But things that are interesting, things that are dynamic. Eventually, I'll get to things that are more pedestrian, because that has value too. But I'm going to start with the stuff that really excites me, right? So I have people doing, you know, like acrobatics, gymnastics, dance, all sorts. And, you know, things like this. This guy is not especially big or built, but to see him doing his thing, he does something called Chinese pull, which is a discipline in circus acts, apparently. Again, you look at this, him climbing the pole with his arms, kind of locomoting himself up vertically, is like a case study in dynamic muscle activation, right? In dynamics, right? People who study anatomy and know a bit, you progress through kind of a spectrum of understanding, right? From very crude, like stick figure when you're a child, to a nicely rendered pose, maybe even a nicely, like beautifully rendered pose from, you know, an old kind of master style, from a figure, a model standing there for, you know, 3 hours. You render in fidelity, and that's great. There's a lot of understanding in getting that level of you know, comprehension for a figure in relaxation. If you're going to study a model for 3 hours, they're not going to be doing something crazy. But when you get somebody doing something actively, then you're starting to understand this idea of activation versus relaxation, right? So when trying to climb up this pole, right, he's pulling down, right? He's endeavoring to just transmit force to his hand to propel his body vertically, right? So we have this whole kinematic chain of force, which is going from the pull to his hand, through his humerus, right? And then what's pulling his arm back to his body? That's the muscles that are active in this particular pose, right? And that's specifically like this nice, beautiful form of the Latissimus Dorsi, right? Huge kind of long muscle going all the way back and grabbing onto the iliac crest right here. Really powerful pull. The interesting thing, so Teres Major, people know my favorite muscle. You know, like, okay, there's a few, but that's a good one. Eventually, I will start to effuse like enthusiasm for this stuff, so I'll try to keep it under control for a little while. But the amazing thing in this particular image, and what reveals itself to me when I flip through these photos is like epiphanies, like, wow, I can't believe I just saw that. And here it's like this rear deltoid, right? 3 heads of the deltoid, front, the lateral head or acromial head, and then the posterior head, right? 3 sections. This rear section is totally active and tensed, right? Just like a belt strapping down, trying to achieve something, trying to achieve the humerus pulling to the spine of the scapula. That's what that muscle is trying to achieve. But the rest of the deltoid is totally relaxed, right? You wouldn't ever sculpt that unless you really understood what was happening. Everybody would just do like a big, kind of striated, super bodybuilder deltoid, but that's not what's happening. That's not what happens in life. So tension, relaxation, be like a marshmallow. You go up and touch it, right? Because if this is doing something, it's fighting against this, right? Counteracting what he's trying to achieve. Okay, so amazing revelations happen like studying the figure in motion. So I want to give you guys a quick preview of the website. So it's going up as a resource for artists all over the world, hopefully, for a very reasonable subscription fee to make it kind of a viable thing for me to continue to add to. Okay, because I want to continue to explore all this stuff because it's really kind of special and fresh. So this is the beta version of the site. It's going out to select beta testers around the world, like people that I know in the various industries, games, visual effects. But pretty much in the site, everything is broken down into motions, right? So you get sequences of figures doing things. So again, different dance, athletics. Here's our guy. Here's an amazing break dancer, just amazing backflip. Why not? We can study that if we wanted. Here's our guy. Let's see what he's doing. All right, this is, by the way, editor's choice selection for the things that I see when I'm putting them up that I think, wow, that's really special. We can really learn from that. And so we'll click through on this and we'll see it at a little bit better resolution. And we'll let it load for a second. If you scroll down while this is loading, you get all the related motions from the same artist, right? So the same amazing kind of performer. And there'll be a space at the bottom where people can upload their own artwork. So over the 5 years that I've been shooting this stuff, I've had samples on my website, and there's been like amazing, just totally unknown to me, just happening in the background. People have been going there and they've been drawing. There's motion studies, there's anatomy studies, and I just search, bodies of motion on the internet, and I start to see these amazing little figure studies from people. And I recognize totally all the poses because the gesture is there, and they capture the action very well. And I think it would be an amazing place for people to come upload your artwork and just share figure studies, whether they're sculpts in ZBrush or whether they're drawings, gesture drawings. And so that's going to be built in to get a little community. But here's our guy doing his thing. And this is what we were talking about, right? Look at, okay, we can start to see what's going on. And all the way up and relaxation. And it'd be nice to see this in a little more detail. So we have like full screen view, which is the full resolution that the photos are being taken in, right? And this is really the nice thing. This is why this is better than 4K footage, which ends up being 8 megapixels or something. These like 18 megapixel images, super crisp. And we can go in and we can study what's happening in his deltoid. I mean, you can look at the hairs on his deltoid if you want to, if that's really what you want to study. But this is the kind of thing, right? So a little zoom out. Look at, this is the kind of thing that you can't predict from just having a general understanding, right? And that's the thing about anatomy. Like, I know a lot of anatomy. And with a lot of anatomy, I can make a very good generic figure, right? But the magic that makes people individual, and the reason you always want to have reference is because not everybody is cut out of this exact same mold, right? When you have a general idea in your mind, that it's taking the bell curve and just putting a line right at the apex of it, right? And it's ignoring all the individual variations that make everybody unique. And especially when things start to articulate, that's when things become so much more sophisticated and really, really deep area for study, right? So again, just like this is a textbook of studying of the articulation of the shoulder.
Scott, Joaquin was wondering, since you're obviously using a library of references you've made over the years, is there anybody else you go to learn about anatomy, or are you just pretty much using the photos that you're doing?
Good question. So the question is, do I?
Is there anybody else? Is there anybody else that you learn
You know,
from?
like originally, you know, I got inspired about anatomy when I was studying in Florence. Not that studying in Florence is the end all and be all. There's a lot of caveats involved in that method of study, kind of the atelier method. But I got excited about anatomy, and a lot through self-study, right? Through a lot of self-study, I accumulated knowledge, and then I started to teach it. And to be honest, like I know as much as I know now because I taught it for so many years to amazing artists, game studios and visual effects studios around the world, and just general population. And whenever somebody frames a question to you in a certain way, you're like, you wrestle with it in your mind, and it reframes the context of what you know. Even if you already know it in one respect, like somebody else's perspective on it maybe makes you learn it better and more. And so after a certain point, and this is kind of my general idea about learning anatomy, you need to get people from like knowing nothing to like here. If the spectrum goes all the way out to Paul over there, right? You have to get them to here, and from here, that's when they can run. You know, you're teaching them to crawl and walk. As soon as they can walk, they can learn to run on their own, and that's the thing. There's tons of resources. There's amazing books written in the 19th century that if you just people own. I know people out here own the book by Paul Crochet, a red-covered book called Artistic Anatomy. Go figure. I know lots of people own it, but I bet like 5% have read it. There's amazing stuff in there, and if you just read it and learn what he says, you know as much as you need to know. And so, that's the long answer to the question. So, quickly to just kind of finish the tour, there's a lot of good stuff, and it's continuing to get added to. Some amazing figures, kung fu, martial arts, just people really advanced in their discipline. And then the kind of bodies that develop as a result of training for something that's not just lifting weights or a bodybuilder that you download your reference from wherever. You get a kind of a quality to a physique that's different and functional, and it's an amazing thing, right? And then hopefully you understand a little bit about what's going on, right? How is this guy achieving this pose? What's the dynamics of it? What's the momentum? What's fighting that? What's he doing with his body? So really nice stuff. I mean, for me, like looking at, sorry, I'll go back. That was, where were we? We were just right about here. If I look at that, like his scapula is nearly pulled off his body. Like you don't see that very often. Certainly not somebody who's doing your average thing. And so to study that and learn about how that is possible is really interesting. And again, just a great photo to just draw from, right? Light, shadow shapes, fun stuff. Okay, so that's the website, and there'll be the link at the end, which it's bodiesinmotion.photo. You can sign up for information. Okay, I'll give you the link again. But I was at Valve recently in August doing a little pass through Seattle, and we just sat down and I was showing them the library as it existed a month ago, I guess. And we kind of framed like a spontaneous anatomy study, and there's just a lot of good information. Okay, so hopefully at some point I'll be able to guide you guys through some of the stuff in the library through either like online things or whatever. But also drawing from it, like these I drew this on the plane on the way in, right? I had a lot of time to draw. 10-hour flight from London to Los Angeles I got 2 movies in as well, but some pen sketches. And you guys know how I feel about drawing, right? Like, if there's one discipline that you guys should develop as you're trying to progress as an artist, is to draw, to sketch, right? It doesn't have to be anything amazing, right? You don't have to be an amazing draftsman, but to help your idea process, the way that you develop ideas. If you're doing characters, the way that you develop characters, you know, from just a concept in your brain to eventually something you might sculpt in ZBrush, right? There's a process, and it's so much faster to fail in a sketchbook than it is to fail in ZBrush. And by failing, I mean in trying things and realizing that's not the path to go down, and correcting and going another way. So you want to fail, and this is 5 years of sketchbooks for me, right? This is in my studio, and most of it is rubbish, right? Like, I would not show that, and so there's a rule that I say to people: just don't show. Make a rule that you don't show people your sketchbook, and then you can be free to fail in it and explore and whatever. And there's no obligation. I used to think I had to make beautiful images in my sketchbook. Not the case. Most of them are not. So, but it's a good place to fail, right? All right, so getting on to what we're talking about today, which is actually ZBrush and bodies in motion. Finding like some inspiration from the library. This guy is great, and maybe I'll follow on with a little, I'll show you some sculpts I did from him. But I really liked this guy, you know, and I was trying to put together like this workshop that I did yesterday here, and I said, this guy's great. And one of the nice things about these aerial artists, these guys doing things in the air, is that, you know, I was photographing them and be like, okay, well, let's just spin them around. And so sculpturally, we have a lot of good spatial information. And I'll quickly get this guy up and show you what he looks like in the library. The discipline is called hoop, you know, whatever that makes sense, I guess. Not hula hoop, which is different, but just hanging on the hoop and doing sorts of dynamic things, and just spectacular, right? The guy he was just like, you know, like zero, little body fat on him, and super long. He was a dancer, in fact, and dancers, you'll find, end up having like leg muscles that are beyond like NFL players, you know. They're ridiculous and amazing. So this is what I chose for the workshop yesterday. So we sat down and we did some sculpting from this pose. And I'll quickly go, I'll actually open it full screen as well, and we'll see some details. And I'll talk about some of these details, and then I'll go into ZBrush and I'll start to block in this sculpt for you. Okay, so again, this is kind of understanding the pose, right? He's obviously supporting his weight, right? He's through his arms, like all the tension in his grip. He's got crazy tension in his grip, but biceps, obviously, right? He's trying to pull against it. But the interesting thing, if you look at this arm here, right? There's tons of tension here. Look at this little extension of the biceps tendon just flaring off, right? Tons of tension, but that's a totally relaxed triceps, right? So if you're sculpting and you're like doing a dynamic pose for a character, for a Marvel character or something, and you're just making him like defined all over like you see in an anatomy book, it's not the right answer, right? Because there's something that comes with dynamics, and that's, you know, this idea of passive and active side of the body, right? So one of the things that really struck me about this was, like, again, another example of what happens when you're like really struggling to lift your body weight is Scapula's, again, nearly pulling off his body on this side, right? But not on this side, right? So this one is working a little bit harder than this side. And what I'll do is I'll go into ZBrush shortly, and I'll block in a lot of this form for you, because to people who are, I suppose, uninitiated, it looks like just bumps, right? And this is how the back used to look to me. It used to look like just a bunch of convexities that didn't make any coherent sense. And so I would fake it, right? Everybody probably has that experience of trying to just do things that they don't understand and just kind of making random shapes. And that was okay, but eventually you kind of get tired of that, or you realize that you can figure it out and you can know what's actually happening. So I'll kind of explain this in ZBrush. Okay, so that's it. This is my reminder to start sculpting. So let me see what's happening over here. So I have a little bit of reference loaded into Lightbox, and I think the one that I'll use is actually this one. Unfortunately, I've got this crazy amount of white space over here as well. I could paint it black. Well, this is going to be an interesting dynamic experience. Let me see. How do I do this? That's not it. Which one should I do?
Just press Alt when you're painting.
Oh, am I using? Okay, there we go. Look at that. I've been using ZBrush for a lot of years. And you can tell, like, I'll tell you honestly, ZBrush, me, and painting, they're not three words that ever go together in the same sentence. Polypaint, what is that? Exactly. So this is going to be like really not fun while I get rid of this, but let me try to do this expeditiously. Everybody's learned something about. Damn. All right, here we go. Don't worry. We're almost done. We're almost done. Thank you, everybody, for giving me a ZBrush lesson. That's totally embarrassing. Not really. I'm okay. But look at that. I have a future as a roto painter. Rotoscoping and me is my next career. Okay, so let's see where to go. I mean, this is the starting point, right? So this is a guy that I posed him. I have like a very sparse base mesh that's been, I've been using it for a long time. It's kind of iterated to this, what I consider an optimal thing for figure studies, in that mostly quads, very sparse edge looping on the fingers, right? So when I get in here, I know this guy's going to have to be gripping something, right? So pretty much there's an intersection, an edge loop at each joint of the finger, right? Which is good because anybody who sculpts hands knows that they are a pain in the ass to sculpt. So any advantage you can have is a good advantage. Okay, so how I generally start my sculpt is subdivisions, right? So we'll consider this guy like ready to go. And the thing about these nice edge loops, right? If I smooth them out, I just get little sausage fingers, right? That's all those nice knuckles that I had on the posed fingers are gone. So for my first couple iterations, I just turn off the smooth. I don't know how many people have ever not smoothed on subdivisions, but it is possible. And it's a great thing. Certainly you could crease if you wanted, but I'm not going to. So I'll turn it off for a couple subdivisions and then maybe 6 subdivs. So this guy is going to only be like 1.7 million polys. You don't need much more unless you're going to be getting into ridiculous details on the face, but for this, it's cool. Hey, I'll turn that off, right? And I typically will start, I'll get ready, I'll store a morph target just because I like to, toggle my progress, see before and after where I've come, especially when it gets to that point in a sculpt where like despair is over you. You're just like, this is the most awful thing ever. And it happens, pretty much, I start with a lot of enthusiasm and I end with a lot of enthusiasm, but the whole middle is just like despair, right? It's all just like, oh, this is terrible. This is going to be so hard. Why am I doing this? And I'm like, oh, it turned out pretty well. That's nice. And so that's what I do. I have these little tricks in my brain to help me along the process. And one is to see like a totally smooth subdivided mesh compared to what you've put in. So that's useful. And I'll generally capture my edits on a layer for the same reason, right? To kind of benchmark progress in the sculpt, right? And especially I'll layer things up if I have changes that I'm making to proportions or pose that I'm not sure about, something I want to toggle on and off, or maybe use the slider to change the magnitude of, right? So maybe if I'm like, his head's too small, I put it 20% more with transpose, and then it actually only needs to be 15%. I can dial back with the morph slider or the layer slider, and it's good. Okay, I think you guys have probably all seen like lots of sophisticated UI setups, but When it comes to working in ZBrush, like, find out what you do, what you use, and then make it efficient for you to access it. So I watched a little bit of the talk before, and they were talking about their stuff. I've got my brushes marked to the front toggle of my Wacom pen, right? So I don't have to go down here to get it. I'll just get it here and like right underneath what I'm sculpting, which is great. And then you have a pop-up menu, again, also marked to a hotkey on the tablet. So great. Let me just quickly get a little alpha for my brush. And the way that I proceed generally with a figure sculpture is, with anatomy in general, whether it's drawing or whatever, is understanding kind of where the skeleton fits within the context of the form, right? And there's certain places on the body where there's landmarks, what I call skeletal landmarks, right? Obviously, like looking down the center of the body, the center line of the body, you have the sternum, right? And that actually ends up, articulation of the clavicle, right? Clavicle is a little S-shaped thing, well, a very weak S, right? A very elongated S shape, meaning it has convexity here and a little loop at the other end. This actually, out here, ends up being really important for attaching the front head of the deltoid. Okay, and for the most part, I think that I'm super fast when it comes to sculpting, but I do things twice, so it slows me down eventually because I'm not sculpting with symmetry, which you'll notice. I'm not sculpting with symmetry because for me, the body, the details of the pose are so different that it's as fast for me to sculpt it twice uniquely than to do once with symmetry and then rework a part to make it right. So it's also more, I will use symmetry for his face, right? Posable symmetry is great. I'll use that to block in the portrait. And things where it won't be noticed, like toes, right? Maybe he has the same curl on both feet. I could do that. That would make sense to me. But for everything else, it's fast enough for me to iterate or sculpt twice. Okay, so from here, right, either end of the clavicle, right, the end of this S shape, and just so that I'm not talking like abstractly, I have a little skeleton loaded in. You guys can see what I'm sculpting is this shape. And then out here, the clavicle attaches to the scapula, essentially, right? The whole mechanism of the shoulder is very intricate, but the interesting thing about it mechanically is that it's only attached to the skeleton at this very center, right at the pit of your neck, right? So that's this kind of mechanical connection, clavicle to scapula, and specifically this nice big bony plate called the acromion process, right? Not to get too heavy into names, but I will. I don't want to use that guy. That guy's too finished. We'll go with this guy. So again, like you just saw on the skeleton, so this kind of comes in, adjoins the acromion process, and from the acromion process, we're down to these other landmarks. And you'll see on the skeleton, orange things are subcutaneous landmarks, things right underneath the skin, right? And those are going to guide us through understanding the crazy stuff happening on the back of this guy, right? Because the landmarks, even though they're surrounded by muscles, they guide you, and it becomes just like connecting the dots. What you have, an understanding of the muscles and the landmarks located. Okay, so roughly the spine of the scapula, what we're just observing, goes down like this, not that far, but roughly to this edge loop. And in fact, it may actually be more like this. Because what happens when you raise your arm, there's a mechanism by which the scapula starts to rotate as the humerus elevates. Right? So anytime you're doing a pose that's not arms by the side, like you're doing a character doing something crazy, something dynamic, then consider what the arm is doing and then figure out what the rotation of the scapula is. Because if you don't articulate the scapula at the same time, then your muscles aren't going to fit properly. I mean, it's just how mechanically the body works. Okay, and you can see it actually on the skeleton as well. On this elevated arm, is elevated about 90 degrees. There's about 30 degrees of rotation in the scapula. So if I leave you with one numerical thing today, I'm not going to give you the formula, but I will leave you with a number. If you elevate your humerus to 90 degrees, meaning 90 degrees to vertical, so it's out horizontal, the scapula should be 30 degrees, right? So just like you see here, and roughly what I'm doing with these two arms on the sculpt. Oh, why do I keep going back to that guy? The big reveal is just ignore what I've just shown you. Because I don't think I'm going to get fully resolved in the time that I have, which is short. Okay, so anyways, that's the scaffolding. Like those guide me. That little bit of framework is the starting point for the back muscles, right? And a few other areas that are interesting, right? There's a little bump at the back of your neck. It's called the 7th cervical vertebra, the last of your neck vertebrae, quite prominent. And you can see the little bumps here in his neck. He's actually showing a little bit of 6th and 7th. And that'll have a little bit of implication when I start to block this in. Likewise, there's, like we saw on our guy climbing, right? We saw that big sweep of the Latissimus Dorsi muscle, which is coming down like this. You guys remember that? Well, this is going to help when we interconnect that muscle from arm, you know, like a muscle that pulls the arm to the body. The most direct route is what we see here, like arm to what ends up being the pelvis, right? So it's good when we're blocking in the landmarks to have some notion of where this crest of the pelvis sits, right? And people will recognize as I start to block in the endpoints, everybody's seeing those little dimples on the back of, right above the bum, the bottom. Part of, they're called posterior superior iliac spines and anterior superior iliac spines, front and back upper spines. And this bone is called the ilium, and we'll just say iliac crest for this line. Okay? So that's roughly, along with the center line of the spine, the scaffolding, right? The framework that you're going to kind of put the muscles into. Okay, now I'll block this in relatively quickly, and you'll see that it is kind of a point-to-point sort of thing. And I'm going to try to get my guy a little bit bigger. And he's just going to hang out there. I'm not going to paint. I might do a little more painting. Excuse me while I paint, guys, now that I know how to do it. I'm painting, it seems, with clay tubes brush, which is not cool. It's like I'm painting with big pixelated brush, but it's going to be sweet when I finish, so you bear with me. And that's good enough. There we go. Oh, do you see what I see? That's irritating. Oh my God. It's gone pear-shaped now. Ah, there we go. We just contrasted a little bit. Good enough, guys. We're going to leave it for now. If you see that thing, it's not part of my sculpt. That's part of the thing I didn't finish painting. Okay, so really the other thing that we need to kind of locate, just because of the interconnections, is kind of the insertion of the deltoid, which is going to be, you know, if you imagine the length of the humerus going down to there, and way up inside the shoulder, a little bit less than halfway down is where we're going to have these points. And what you see here on the figure is right that indentation. That's like a mirror, like a little X-ray into where the humerus lies, right? Because that's where the deltoid is diving in, this big convex shape, diving in to grab onto the bone. And kind of below it is brachialis, an arm muscle, kind of coming off the bone. So that's like a reliable indicator of one point to help us resolve the axis of the humerus. I'm going to do it. I am definitely going to do it. Secretly, I just did that little aside to talk about the deltoid so that I could get rid of that thing because it was really annoying me for a second. Okay. get both sides of him back. Okay, so let's just look at what's happening with Trapezius, right? So Trapezius has this is a complex shape in the back, but essentially what it does is it just grabs onto a lot of the scaffolding that we've just established, right? So I have this little outer lip of the clavicle, that little bit where it S-shapes around. Well, that is, I'm going to get rid of the arms for a second, the hands, we don't need these. And I'll get rid of this one too. And I might even get rid of the legs just so nothing crazy happens. Okay, so what I was saying, we have this outer lip of the S, which is kind of the very front insertion of the trapezius. And you can see this column either side of his neck. That's this front edge of the trapezius going up to the top of the neck, right? And this ends up going, when we're talking about a posed character, the center of his skull, center line is coming down like this, right? So this column on the left side is going twisting around, right? It's not straightforward, just not going up to here, right? And you can see it quite clearly on this side, right? Especially in the reference. That shadow shape is from this bit coming down, and I'm trying to kind of spin this pretty reasonably so nobody gets like motion sickness from meshes tumbling like crazy. Keep you oriented. So that's the front border, and then from there we kind of work out along the inside of the acromion, right? So all this stuff that I blocked in, this landmark, that ends up giving us form like this, right? Directly from the inner edge of the acromion, spine of the scapula, upper edge of the spine of the scapula, in towards this little tendinous diamond that sits around these little bumps in the back of your neck, right? Really good landmarks for establishing this form, right? And right now I'm working reasonably schematically, right? I'm blocking in a little bit what I know, and I'm going to resolve that with what I observe at the same time, right? So once I get this blocked in, I will resolve volumes, right? So this is obviously a little more convex than what I have here, right? So I maintain a subdivision hierarchy. Like, I love it. I love having subdivisions because, you know what? That needs to be more convex. How about I just move 2 verts out, right? Or a couple verts. Like there's an amazing thing when you're doing figure sculpture. If you have very sparse, low resolution, you can pull a couple vertices and change a volume very easily without having to fret about it, without having to overwork it or to leave artifacts, right? If I tried to do that at super high res, there's things that happen that are less controllable than just doing what I did, right? Okay, so this is kind of direct connection of the spine of the scapula to this little area around the vertebral column. But what happens next? And you see all this crazy stuff going down the middle of the back. This is kind of the lower section of the trapezius, and it doesn't attach to bone anywhere but right here, right? There's a little tendinous wheel, like a hub of a bicycle wheel, that's sitting right on the inner border of the scapula, right here. And essentially that just distributes this lower section of the trapezius. And you'll see me, I just literally radiate it out. And my clay tube style is roughly in line with the flow of the muscles at the same time. Not that that's critical, but in fact it builds up form in a nice coherent way. Right, this is what happens, and this is what we're seeing. Like, you can actually, if you observe closely, you start to see that, yeah, there's actually some sections of this lower trapezius that are tensed more than others, so they're getting a little bit of striations and definition inside of it. And then same again on this side, right? So this is actually attached here, but then it's just distributing down here, all the way up through the middle, something like that. Now, quickly, so we don't lose too much time because I want to show you a little bit more. we'll do the interconnection on this arm, for the rest of the scapula, right? So what we end up having is from the point, the bottom corner of the scapula, right? We have this guy, bottom point. That gives us the Teres Major. Don't look at that guy. Why did I even load him in? He looks good, by the way, but there will be more of that in a minute. So when we're talking about this muscle, right, it's not an easy tube to see right there, right? The muscle is very, very tubular.
It's in line. Scott, there's a question coming in
Yep.
here in the digital through the Twitter feed. Jean-Julien Jupinet would like to know, if you have one, can you share some method or a trick to help learn anatomy faster?
Oh,
a
trick for learning it faster.
Take your time.
Well, I mean, there's everybody has a certain bandwidth going into I'm going to sculpt while I talk, actually. So everybody has like a bandwidth for learning stuff, right? But it's true that a proper method can accelerate that. The only well, I'm not going to like blow my own horn or toot my own horn, but like I do teach anatomy courses, and I have a method that's evolved over 10 years that is, I think, one of the more efficient ways, and that's to study the body from the surface in, right? You want to be able to decode the kind of stuff we're seeing here. And so I teach crochet drawing, 2D crochet drawing, not 3D crochet sculpture, because in a lot of ways that's putting the cart before the horse, where you're studying the inside of the body out. Who cares about the inside of the body when the primary goal is to create the surface, right? You want to understand the body from the surface in. And so if you're going to dedicate your time to one thing, it would be study the surface. And then as you get more sophisticated understanding, you can study deeper in, and then slowly understand the smaller influences that the inside of the body has on the surface. But it's not a good use of time to study the opposite way, in my opinion. Okay, so right now I've just started to block in the deltoid, right? I'm going down to that point, that insertion point that we had. There's no volume in it, right? So I could drop down, or I could use like a ridiculously powerful standard brush, or turn it down, and I can pop it out this way too. Right? Some of you will notice that this is the rear head of the deltoid, right? This actually ends up inserting, or in fact originates from the spine of the scapula, but the muscle doesn't go all the way there. So you can see this sharp edge that's cut off here. It's because it has a big tendinous insertion, right? So there's a big flat section of tendon that sits like a little triangle between this kind of edge and the spine. All right, then we're going to have all sorts of something in here which is just filling in the plate of the scapula. It's called the infraspinatus. Infra, below, spinatus, below the spine, as in below the spine of the scapula, which anatomically, this is the spine of the scapula. So if you understand what infra means, below, that puts you in the right spot. Right, so there's some sense to the anatomical names. Okay, the next thing that we see on this side, right, if we're, the Teres Major, which I've just sculpted here, goes from the corner to the humerus, right? Inside the humerus, the axis of the humerus is sitting right in here somewhere. I could tell you more about that, but not right now. But look at this. That muscle is pulling down, it's pulling his arm down. So we have, this is a hard thing to go from the back to the inside of the arm, right? This whole area, like resolving what's happening in the armpit, is like a convergence of all the muscles from the torso going to the humerus and vice versa, right? And that's like a window into complexity, right? And so one of the things is you have to have an idea of where the humerus sits, and then you're trying to resolve this vector, right? If the muscle's active, this is going to be a straight line, right? The muscle doesn't twist around and go all sorts of roundabout routes. It goes point to point, and that's, this awkward view of the arm from underneath, the armpit from underneath, not something we're used to seeing, but it's an important sanity check on the construction of your model. If you can get that to fit from the back something on the back, way back here to the inside of the arm, then your construction is reasonably sound. Okay, so next is, like we see this line going over top of it, and this actually is more of this form that we saw on that guy climbing the Chinese pole. We saw this axis, right? It's the front border of the Latissimus Dorsi, right? This is going directly to the pelvis, really strong axis of pull. And you can see a little tube of muscle. That's just a bundle of fibers right there. But what the Latissimus Dorsi does is it actually has a huge distributed origin in the small of the back. And that's what we're seeing here. All these jagged lines are the insertion or the origin of the muscle like this. And the top edge is a very thin sheet of muscle, right? That's wrapping all the way over the small of the back, is going back across like this.
10 minutes, sir.
10 minutes, okay.
You can have 11.
10 minutes and then like extra time, or
Yeah.
10 minutes for real?
Like soccer time.
Is it like, we have
Yeah.
extra time? Good,
It's
good,
like
good.
3 minutes of extra time.
Okay.
13 minutes.
Okay, so I probably won't sculpt too much more because I have 10 minutes left, but I want to show, like from here, so that schematically is an approximation of this. This is half what I know and half what I'm observing. From here, once I'm confident that the muscles are placed in the reasonable proportion to each other and about the right volume, that's when you can go in and start to investigate the subshapes, kind of the shapes that are riding on top of the bigger shapes, right? And that's a lot of the visual noise that you're seeing on the reference image is just that. They're small shapes riding on top of big shapes. And so understanding construction anatomically helps you disambiguate what's important as the base form, and then you put the smaller stuff into that. So if I'm happy with how I blocked in the trapezius here, like roughly this edge is accurate, this edge is accurate, I can start to go in and look at these little bundles. I can look at this shape coming off the spine. All these things they're important to the character of the muscle, but they're not the big shape that you're going to block in to start with. Okay, and it's a process. The whole thing is a process, and it's something that I do figure sculptures reasonably quickly because I describe it like a puzzle, right? When you study anatomy, you're learning about the shape of puzzle pieces, right? And the first time you put together a jigsaw puzzle, say it's a 300-piece puzzle, you're like, damn, it takes forever. Imagine you do that same puzzle like 100 times. Eventually, you just look at the piece and be like, well, I know exactly where that goes, and you put it in. Then you know exactly what it's surrounded by, and you put those in, and you can just literally just lay it in, or somebody can just point to a corner and you can resolve it. It's the same way with the body. It doesn't change. People have different shapes and proportions and volumes, but you know what? For 99% of the muscles, there's exceptions, like it's the same. And so constructionally, once you learn that block of knowledge, then it literally is performing variations on a theme, right? Okay, so this is actually me sculpting the thing for real. We'll see if this plays. And yeah, I try to record time lapses because it's going to make me seem really like a ninja to start with, but also it will show you the whole process, like unedited. And this is about 8 or 9 minutes, and then I'll probably have to I'm going to take some extra time, a little bit. And
this is how you get faster.
And this is actually a good time to take questions if there are any questions.
If there's any questions in the studio audience, oh look, there's a hand that's popped up. Show it again. It's hard to see. There you are. It's you. Hey, nice shirt.
Mr. Eaton, it's very nice to have like that, for that reference library body motion that you're building, and then I guess release to the public in near future. I was wondering, as you also mentioned that is possible maybe just business idea pitch could be a bad one, that you give a little talk through each individual shoot about what you observe of that particular body that that is abnormal compared to whatever
Yeah.
would be, textbook,
Yeah.
standard muscle, whatever placement. And I think that, like through through eye of the master, that you see something that,
Yeah.
people like us, we're still learning. We're
I
probably
understand. I
just
understand your
completing-
question.
Yeah.
This was actually the same thing that came up when I was at a big game studio, showing the stuff. They're like, well, amazing photographs, but a lot of it's like it's a veil. Like there's a veil until you understand what you're looking at. And so yeah, I will put some educational resources around it, because for me, I get really excited when I see it. And so if it's like me putting some new motions online every week and doing a little, 30-minute, explanatory thing about why this is really cool, I think there's probably some value in that for people. So it's something that I'm thinking about. I'm going to get the site ready first, and then I will start to add stuff onto it. But that is something that's in my mind. So
Way in the back.
way in the back.
Hello. So, like you said earlier, you're working with some video game companies. Do you find it hard to kind of walk that balance between making most, how would you say, characters are hidden under armor or hidden under a certain amount of clothing because they have to be more action? Is it hard to kind of fight the urge to pull out like that classic artist and kind of dumb down the model? So that it works?
I don't build models for game companies, really.
Okay.
Sometimes if there's a big figurative element, I will,
Yeah.
consult and do reviews and stuff.
Yeah.
But as far as kind of the work that I do, like people, I think all artists working in characters want to do good figure studies. Like there's like an intrinsic knowledge that people as artists want and need to have.
Yeah.
And if you cover it with a little or a lot, it doesn't matter in the end. But,
Yeah, because
but
I
I
know,
think
I understand like there's crunch and there's timelines, but like just consistently just studying this stuff, I mean, it just keeps you on point. Is that what you're saying?
well, for me, this very much is my area of specialization. So it's part of, like I said, this accumulated knowledge is from teaching people like you over many years. And so I have a particular level of knowledge, but I think that, like to get, like working character artists need to have, not necessarily as much and wouldn't develop as much, but you need to study enough. It's things like, forearms, arm muscles, as generations of consoles get more sophisticated, deformation techniques, deformation relates back to understanding what's happening under the body, right? I mean, all the way into feature film where you actually have very, very sophisticated rigs and a need for this level of knowledge, right? If you're doing things at Weta for, Hobbit, or you're doing, Avengers films with, big
Thank
Hulk
you very much.
characters. Yep. Any other
Any
questions?
more questions? Now's your chance before he escapes. There he is. Hey, nice T-shirt. It's the only brush you need.
Just a real quick question. When you do an asymmetrical figure, about how long do you spend on it? I know you want to finish it, but just
That's a
on
good
average.
question.
Yeah.
And I knew somebody was going to ask that question, so I actually timed this guy. I got here on Wednesday. I'm like, I had the figure that I had already done, and I'm like, well, it was probably too involved. And so I said, well, I'd do one. And so I was watching. I had the live stream on Friday, and I sculpted this guy. And he was about 4 hours and 20 minutes, roughly. I was kind of at the 3-hour mark, right with one leg finished. The whole body down and one leg finished, and the other leg was empty. And then crazy things like doing the hands and toes take too much time, But locking in the anatomy, like I said, like it shouldn't be representative of anyone else's benchmark, because it's like that puzzle that I was talking about, right? It's like putting pieces together, and it can go really fast when you understand it. It's like the guy's doing hard surface stuff. He's like, oh yeah, this takes me 5 seconds to do when I'm not talking about it, and that's true. I mean, once with experience, it goes fast.
Another question way in the back here.
Hey, Scott, it's Joe.
Hey.
I'm a working concept artist, and I've been working for a while, and I have, you know, like a good medium level of anatomy in me that I used in my work. Sometimes I'll break out reference, sometimes I won't. But for like a working professional like me who wants to know, get better, brush up on some basics, is it healthy? Do you see any problems with just doing lots of studies on my own, like whether I'm trying to figure out an arm or I'm doing big proportional studies or even facial things? Like, is there anything someone in my position should look out for when doing that, so that I'm not like repeating mistakes or learning?
Well, I think the getting sound reference is the right thing, and some of the people who inspired me, some of the literature that inspired me is like Bridgman, right? George Bridgman has some books from the early 20th century that are amazing. They're actually captures of his instruction on the blackboard, and they're very mechanical, meaning they're not about exacting correct shapes. But you understand when you study that, and I have some of that pile of sketchbooks. Somewhere at the bottom is my studies from Bridgman, you know, and that's through that. You know, it's not necessarily, you know, a life drawing with a model in front of you, but it's understanding the mechanism, how the bicep might insert into the radius or something like that, and how it helps turn the hand up. You know, like through you know, very reasonable investment of study. Like for me, at a certain point, it was like me over coffee in the morning, you know, for 20 minutes in my sketchbook with Bridgman open, you know, and there's a ton of good information to be learned that way. Otherwise, like I said, read an anatomy book, right? People spend a lot of time writing the text in the books, but you'd be surprised. And for some reason, maybe we're all very visually inclined. We don't read it. We rather just go straight to the pictures. And so there's value in that. Okay, I'm going to flip through this. This is the final render.
Really cool.
Key shot, thank you very much. Fast. There's the turntable.
There's another question right here in the front, stage right.
Have you ever experimented with MRI data?
With, sorry, what?
MRI.
MRI, yeah, I use MRI a lot in my anatomy courses. It's very difficult to acquire MRI data, meaning short of putting yourself in the scanner, because there's like patient anonymity issues and things. But there's some good samples. If you want to find some, you can go to something called just search Osirix, O-S-I-R-I-X. They have a free viewer, and you can get some samples. And it's interesting. It is very interesting, and some of it is, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. And if there was a better free resource for a library of it, I'd be blown away because I love it, you know. But it's just one piece. It's a small piece of the learning puzzle, but it's cool. 100% cool.
Another one here in the front row. Winding down, by the way.
Just a quick question. I noticed how you use the clay tubes to keep the striation, and I like that.
Yep.
How hard is it for you to not smooth? And when do you decide to smooth at the end, or do you keep that hand in the finished piece?
Well, for example, this guy, he's still rough. But let me just flip through a couple slides, and I'll talk about it. So this was the other thing, the other sculpt that I did for kind of this series, From Bodies in Motion. So this one was actually a little bit more challenging because this was my inspiration pose, right? This crazy, dynamic, super dynamic pose, and I only have one view of it. He's not spinning. He's like doing some crazy stuff. And so from the library, I grabbed a bunch of other views of like occluded limbs, him doing similar things. And I'm not going to show the time lapse, but that's him. And then you went through the same process. This is like no sculpting, right? That's just a mesh. But then to smooth him, like the one magic brush that I would say that you should use if you have that is the smooth directional brush. Load it in by default. I've got it in my folder. It loads in. It helps you. It doesn't like smooth brush by default just destroys things in every direction. smooths in every direction, like an omni-smooth, right? But smooth direction will go. If you do it the same way, like I did the brush strokes for the muscle direction, like if you smooth in that same direction, you're left with really nice things, and it's very controllable. So this was the second one, and he's doing
Neato.
fun,
Cool.
spinning stuff. And I'll tell you what, man, insert multi-mesh chain, winner. That's like it's the best thing about the sculpture, actually, the chain. It's so glorious.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that's a couple other views, a little bit, and this is the, as we're wrapping up, this is the closing slides. This is where the library is going to live, bodiesinmotion.photo. And right up there right now is a sign-up page, right? So I'm trying to get this out to the community, like concept artists, sculptors, illustrators, all the people who have an interest in the kind of stuff that I've been showing. And so the first 100 people to go there and put their email in because we're about 3 or 4 weeks away from launching, right? And so you get like the full subscription for a month if you can go drop your stuff in. Okay, so remember that, take a photo really quickly, and for me, that's Facebook and Twitter and my website, of course, as well. So you can find me on any of those or follow it, and you get updates as well, okay? That's it.
You bet. Scott Eaton, everybody.